Priority boarding isn't for people like you. Step aside before you hold up real passengers. Lila Grant's hand snapped up inches from the black woman's chest, palm rigid like a barrier, her smile tight, but edged with quiet contempt. The scanner chirped as she waved another passenger through without even checking his ticket. The black woman didn't move. The first-class boarding pass in her hand was clear, undeniable, but Lila shoved it back like it meant nothing. "Don't make this difficult," Daniel Reeves cut in, stepping closer, his voice rising just enough to draw attention. "You're already causing a scene." Phones lifted. A few people exchanged looks, already deciding who was right. The black woman felt every stare pressing in, every assumption hanging heavy in the air, but her posture never shifted, her expression calm, controlled. She glanced once at the terminal clock. 9 minutes. That was all it would take for them to realize they had just tried to remove the one person who owned everything around them. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floor. Gate B14 buzzed with the usual pre-boarding activity. Passengers checking phones, children squirming in seats, business people tapping away at laptops. Evelyn Brooks adjusted the sleeve of her Navy travel suit and checked her watch. The Los Angeles flight would begin boarding in 10 minutes. At 62, Evelyn carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her position through decades of hard work. Her short, silver-streaked hair framed a face marked by intelligence and determination. She had deliberately chosen to travel without her usual executive assistance. No VIP escort, no special treatment. Just another passenger. That was the point, after all. How could she truly understand her airline if she only experienced it from the executive suite? The gate agent announced priority boarding for first class and elite status members. Evelyn lifted her leather bag and approached the priority lane, boarding pass ready in hand. "Ma'am, you need to stop right there." Lila Grant, the young gate agent, threw up her hand like a traffic cop, palm flat and forward. Her voice carried across the waiting area, drawing curious glances. "This lane is for our priority passengers only," Lila said, not bothering to hide her impatience. Her eyes barely flickered to Evelyn's face before dismissing her. Evelyn remained composed, extending her boarding pass. "I understand. I have a first-class ticket." Lila took the boarding pass between two fingertips, gave it the briefest glance, and handed it back with a tight smile. "I think you're confused about the boarding zones. Please join the regular line and wait your turn." Behind Evelyn, a white man in a golf shirt approached. Lila's demeanor transformed instantly. Bright smile, warm welcome. "Good morning, sir. You can go right ahead." She waved him through without even checking his boarding pass. The man hesitated, looking from Evelyn to Lila. "But I think she was—" "It's fine," Lila cut him off. "Please proceed." Heat crawled up Evelyn's neck, but decades of self-control kept her voice steady. "Excuse me, but there seems to be some confusion. Would you please look at my boarding pass again? I am in first class." People were watching now. A teenager aimed his phone in their direction. An elderly couple whispered to each other. The space around the gate desk seemed to shrink. Lila's smile thinned. "Ma'am, I've already checked. If you continue to hold up the line, I'll need to call my supervisor." "That would be helpful, actually," Evelyn said, still calm. "I'd like to speak with them." Lila's eyes narrowed at the challenge. She pressed a button on her headset. "Daniel, can you come to gate B14? I have a situation." Evelyn noticed how Lila emphasized the word situation while staring directly at her. The implication was clear. Evelyn herself was the problem. A middle-aged white man in a supervisor's uniform appeared within minutes. Daniel Reeves had the harried look of someone perpetually behind schedule. "What's happening here?" he asked, not addressing Evelyn directly. Lila leaned toward him. "This passenger insists she should be in the priority lane. She's disrupting our boarding process." Daniel finally looked at Evelyn, his assessment quick and dismissive. "Ma'am, our gate agents are trained professionals. If she says you're in the wrong line, you need to follow instructions. I haven't been given the courtesy of having my boarding pass properly examined," Evelyn said. She held it out again. "I'm in first class, seat 2A. Daniel barely glanced at the pass. "Sometimes people get confused about how boarding works. Or perhaps this isn't your ticket. The name on this pass is Brooks." "That's correct. Evelyn Brooks. And you can verify that's you?" The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable. More phones were out now. The priority line had stalled. Passengers exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others merely curious about the delay. Evelyn could have ended this immediately. One sentence, "I'm the CEO of this airline," would transform their faces from smug dismissal to horrified recognition. But something deeper held her back. This wasn't about her personal dignity anymore. This was about whether her company treated people fairly when no one important was watching. "I can certainly verify my identity," Evelyn said evenly, "but I'd like to understand why the gentleman behind me was waved through without any verification at all." Daniel's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we have procedures. Selective procedures, it seems." A woman nearby nodded in agreement. Someone murmured, "She's right." Lila's face flushed with anger. "You need to step aside now." Her voice rose, ensuring everyone at the gate could hear. "You're holding up all these other passengers who followed the rules properly." "Step aside and wait where, exactly?" Evelyn asked. Lila pointed to an area away from both lines. "Over there. Until we sort this out." The message couldn't have been clearer if it had been announced over the PA system. "You don't belong here. You need to be managed. You are the problem." Evelyn felt the weight of dozens of eyes. This was no misunderstanding. This was a public challenge to her dignity, a power play meant to put her in her place, all based on a quick glance and immediate assumptions. She took a slow breath and remained exactly where she stood. Daniel Reeves planted his feet firmly between Evelyn and the boarding gate, his presence creating a physical barrier. The other passengers flowed around them like a stream around a rock, stealing glances as they moved past. "Ma'am, boarding is already underway," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You're causing a delay." "I'm simply trying to board my flight," Evelyn replied. "In the correct line with my first-class ticket." Daniel sighed dramatically, as if explaining something to a child. "Look, sometimes people get confused about boarding zones. It happens all the time. First-time flyers especially." "I'm not confused about boarding zones, Mr. Reeves," Evelyn said, noting his name tag. "And I've flown over 2 million miles in my lifetime." A ripple of whispers spread through the waiting area. A young woman with braids made eye contact with Evelyn and gave her a small nod of solidarity. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Brooks, Evelyn Brooks." She kept her voice steady despite the growing heat in her chest. "Ms. Brooks, Lila here is one of our most experienced gate agents. If she directed you to wait, there was a reason." "A reason she hasn't explained," Evelyn pointed out. "Could you please verify my seat assignment in your system? Seat 2A, first class." Daniel didn't move toward the computer. He didn't even look down at her boarding pass again. "We have procedures to follow. You're holding up the line." "I'm not holding up anything. I was prevented from scanning my valid boarding pass." Evelyn gestured toward the electronic reader. "A simple verification would resolve this in seconds." "Ma'am," Daniel's voice took on an edge, "your tone is becoming problematic." Evelyn blinked. Her tone had remained measured throughout the entire exchange. I'm speaking calmly and directly. How is that problematic? A middle-aged man waiting in line behind them muttered, "She's being treated differently than everyone else." Daniel shot the man a look before turning back to Evelyn. "If you continue to cause a disturbance, we'll have other options to consider." As if on cue, Evelyn noticed Daniel's left hand making a subtle gesture toward a security officer standing near the adjacent gate. The officer glanced over, his attention now focused on their exchange. "I'm not disturbing anything," Evelyn said. "I'd simply like to board my flight with the ticket I purchased." Lila stood behind the counter, arms crossed. "You need to follow instructions." A young man with glasses had his phone discreetly positioned, recording the interaction. Several others were watching intently now, their own boarding momentarily forgotten. Daniel stepped closer to Evelyn, lowering his voice. "Listen, we can make this simple or complicated. Your choice." The threat hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt a cold clarity wash over her. This wasn't about a boarding pass anymore. This wasn't even about mistaken identity. This was about power, and who was allowed to question it. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," Evelyn said. Daniel's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. "I am the supervisor." "Then I'd like to speak with whoever supervises you." "They're not available at the gate," he replied with finality. "And we're not calling them for a boarding issue." An older flight attendant appeared at the jet bridge entrance. She glanced at the commotion, her eyes moving from Daniel to Evelyn with a flicker of uncertainty. For a moment, it seemed like she might intervene. Daniel noticed her hesitation and gave a small head shake. The flight attendant pressed her lips together and disappeared back down the jet bridge. "Ms. Brooks," Daniel said, his patience visibly thinning, "here are your options. You can step aside voluntarily and wait while we complete boarding, or—" He gestured toward the security officer who was now watching them directly. "You can be removed from the boarding area entirely." The threat hung in the air, transforming what began as disrespect into open aggression. Evelyn stood perfectly still, aware of every eye on her, aware of the phone's recording, aware of how quickly this could escalate if she showed even a hint of the anger building inside her. What had started as a simple boarding had become a public humiliation, one designed to force her into submission rather than address the actual issue. "Those are my only options?" she asked quietly. "Those are your only options," Daniel confirmed, satisfaction evident in his tone. "What's it going to be?" "Those are my only options?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Those are your only options," Daniel confirmed, satisfaction evident in his tone. "What's it going to be?" A movement near the jet bridge caught Evelyn's eye. The same flight attendant had returned, this time stepping closer to the desk rather than retreating. She was older, maybe mid-50s, with silver streaks in her dark hair, and a name tag that read, "Marjorie Hale." Her eyes darted from the growing crowd to Daniel's rigid posture, then settled on Evelyn. Security was already making their way toward the gate, responding to Daniel's earlier signal. Marjorie moved behind the counter, positioning herself where she could see Evelyn's boarding pass that still lay on the counter. She studied it for a moment, then looked up at Evelyn's face. Something changed in her expression. A flicker of recognition, then alarm. She leaned toward Daniel, her voice low but urgent. "Daniel, I think you should check the passenger record again." Daniel barely glanced at her. "Not now, Marjorie. I'm handling this." "But the name—" Marjorie persisted, reaching for the computer. "I said I'm handling it." Daniel's voice hardened as he blocked her access to the keyboard. "Get back to the plane. We're finishing boarding." Marjorie hesitated, her eyes meeting Evelyn's. In that brief exchange, Evelyn saw what she needed, someone who recognized the wrongness of the situation. The security officer was only a few steps away now. Evelyn reached into her leather bag and removed a sleek black card with the Aurora Skies logo embossed in silver. Without fanfare, she placed it on the counter next to her boarding pass. Call corporate operations, she said calmly. Immediately. The executive access card gleamed under the terminal lights. Lila, who had been watching from behind the desk, leaned forward to see it, then smirked. Everyone has fancy credit cards, she said. That doesn't change boarding procedures. Daniel glanced at the card, but seemed determined not to be thrown off course. Ms. Brooks, we're not calling anyone. The gate crew represents the company at this point. If you have a complaint, you can submit it through customer service after you step aside. I see, Evelyn said. She picked up her card and returned it to her bag. Then I'll make the call myself. She stepped away from the counter, just enough to allow the line to continue, though no one moved. With deliberate calmness, she took out her phone and pressed a single button, a direct line. This is Brooks, she said, when the call connected. I'm at Gate B14 in Atlanta. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. She listened briefly, then added, No names yet. Just send the protocol team. Ending the call, Evelyn checked the large terminal clock hanging above the gate. It was 10:42 a.m. Operations will address this in 9 minutes, she said quietly, not to Daniel or Lila specifically, but loud enough that those nearby could hear. Ma'am, you need to, Daniel began, but stopped mid-sentence. His gate computer screen had frozen. He tapped a few keys, then more frantically hit several commands. Nothing responded. What the hell? He muttered. Lila tried to complete the boarding scan for the next passenger in line, but her scanner beeped with an error message. She tried her login again, only to find her credentials had been invalidated. Daniel, I'm locked out, she said, her earlier confidence faltering. The boarding process stuttered to a halt. Passengers in line began to whisper. The digital boarding display above the gate suddenly switched from boarding to please stand by. Daniel grabbed his phone, punching in numbers with growing agitation. This is Gate Supervisor Reeves at B14. We have a system failure and… He stopped, listening, his face draining of color. What do you mean, stand down? We have a flight to board. The security officer who had been approaching Evelyn stopped abruptly, his hand rising to his earpiece as he received new instructions. He nodded once, then turned away from Evelyn completely. Daniel watched this with visible confusion. Officer, we still need assistance with… The security officer shook his head. New orders, sir. I'm to remain present, but not engage with the passenger. He stepped back, positioning himself at a distance. The atmosphere in the gate area had transformed. What had been a confrontation with clear lines of authority had become something unpredictable. Daniel's confidence visibly wavered as he tried his computer again, only to find it still locked. What did you do? He demanded, looking at Evelyn. Evelyn checked the clock again. 10:44 a.m. I haven't done anything, she replied calmly. Yet. The terminal clock ticked to 10:46 a.m. Tension hung in the air like storm clouds. No one moved from their spots. Not Daniel, not Lila, not the passengers frozen in the boarding line. The only sounds were the distant airport announcements and the nervous tapping of Daniel's fingers against the counter. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her posture straight and dignified. She hadn't raised her voice once, hadn't created a scene, yet somehow had managed to bring the entire gate to a standstill with just a phone call. Daniel kept checking his watch, then the terminal screens, then back to his locked computer. Sweat beaded along his hairline, dampening his collar. He tried his phone again. Operations, this is Reeves at B14. I need to speak with the supervisor immediately. His voice cracked slightly. No, listen, we have a passenger claiming to be… I can't… Just send someone here now. The minutes crawled by. 10:47, 10:48. Passengers had their phones out now, not even pretending they weren't recording. The public humiliation had completely reversed direction. Where Evelyn had been the target, Now the gate crew stood exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. A murmur rippled through the crowd as a woman in a crisp charcoal suit came rushing down the terminal corridor. Her heels clicked purposefully against the floor as she approached, followed closely by a man in an airport operations uniform. Their faces were set with the grim determination of people about to handle an emergency. "That's Naomi Bell," someone whispered. "Regional VP." Daniel straightened his tie and stepped forward. "Ms. Bell, we've had a situation with—" Naomi Bell didn't even glance his way. She moved directly to Evelyn, extending her hand. "Ms. Brooks," she said, slightly out of breath, "I apologize for the delay. We weren't informed you would be traveling today." The words hit like a thunderclap. Passengers exchanged shocked looks. Phones lifted higher to capture the moment. Lila's mouth fell open. The color drained from her face as realization dawned. The passenger she'd dismissed, the woman she'd tried to force out of line, was Evelyn Brooks, the CEO of Aurora Skies Airlines. "Ms. Brooks," Daniel repeated, his voice barely audible. "As in?" "Your chief executive officer," Naomi confirmed coldly. She turned back to Evelyn. "What happened here?" Evelyn handed over her boarding pass, the same one Lila had barely glanced at earlier. "I attempted to board my flight in the first-class lane, as indicated on my ticket. I was denied, dismissed, and nearly removed from the gate by security." Naomi examined the boarding pass, then looked sharply at Daniel. "This is clearly a first-class boarding pass. Untouched. Not even scanned. There must have been some confusion," Daniel stammered. "We were following procedure for what?" Evelyn spoke for the first time since Naomi's arrival. Her voice was low but crystal clear, carrying throughout the gate area. "For profiling passengers? For making assumptions based on appearance? For refusing to verify information when directly asked?" Daniel's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Evelyn checked the terminal clock one last time. 10:51 a.m. Exactly 9 minutes since her call. "You had 9 minutes," she said, addressing both Daniel and Lila. 9 minutes to treat one paying passenger with basic respect and dignity. You failed at every step. You didn't verify my ticket when asked. You escalated rather than resolved. You threatened rather than assisted. Her words carried no heat, just precision, which somehow made them more devastating. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Grant," Evelyn continued, using their names though they'd never properly introduced themselves. "Your employment with Aurora Skies Airlines is terminated, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lila's face crumpled. "The rest of this gate crew who witnessed this behavior and chose to enable rather than correct it will also be removed from duty pending review," Evelyn added, looking at the other staff members who had stood by. "We cannot and will not employ people who treat any passenger this way." Naomi nodded to the operations manager, who stepped forward. "Please, surrender your badges and report to HR." Daniel's face flushed red. "You can't just— This isn't— There are procedures for—" "Yes, there are procedures," Evelyn agreed. "Procedures you chose to ignore when they applied to me. Now, we're following different procedures. The ones for dismissing employees who violate our most basic standards of service and respect." Cameras continued to record as Daniel and Lila removed their ID badges with shaking hands. There was no shouting, no dramatic escort, just the quiet, public accountability that was somehow more powerful than any scene could have been. Evelyn's face showed no triumph, no satisfaction, only a weary resolve. This wasn't about winning. It was about correcting a wrong that should never have happened. As the gate was transferred to new staff and boarding preparations resumed, Evelyn gathered her things to board the plane. Marjorie Hale, the flight attendant who had tried to intervene earlier, stepped close to her side. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly, so only Evelyn could hear. "What happened to you today?" "It's not the first time." "Black passengers. They get this treatment more often than anyone reports." "Many times." Boarding announcements fell silent at gate B14. Passengers shuffled awkwardly, eyes darting between their phones and the now understaffed counter. The half-boarded plane sat at the jet bridge, its engines quiet, as if holding its breath. "Ms. Brooks," Naomi said, her voice still trembling slightly, "your scheduled departure for Los Angeles is in 20 minutes. We can expedite your boarding and ensure—" "I won't be going to Los Angeles today," Evelyn said firmly. She turned toward Marjorie, the flight attendant's words still echoing in her mind. "Tell me more about these other incidents." Marjorie glanced nervously at the crowd of passengers within earshot. "Perhaps somewhere more private?" Evelyn nodded, but before they could move, a passenger stepped forward, a middle-aged black woman in a business suit. "It happened to me too," she said. 3 months ago. Same gate, same supervisor." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held old anger. "I filed a complaint. Nothing happened." Another passenger joined in. "My mother was treated this way last Christmas. They made her miss her flight home." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She turned to Naomi. "The plane stays at the gate." "But the schedule, the passengers—" Naomi stammered. "The passengers will understand a brief delay for an operational necessity," Evelyn said. "Announce that due to a staffing issue, there will be a 30-minute hold. Anyone who needs to rebook can do so without penalty. But we are not pushing back until I understand exactly what's happening at this station." She gestured for Marjorie to follow her away from the crowd. Naomi trailed behind, her phone buzzing constantly. "This is more than just today, isn't it?" Evelyn asked, once they reached a quieter area near an empty gate. Marjorie nodded, the weight of years seeming to press on her shoulders. "There's a pattern, Ms. Brooks. Black travelers, older passengers, people who don't look premium enough by someone's standards, they get questioned, delayed, sometimes even denied boarding. It's never officially about race or age, always about procedure or security concerns." "And the complaints?" Evelyn asked. "They file them, but nothing happens," Marjorie explained. "The reports get handled by the local supervisors, the same people causing the problems. Then they just disappear." Evelyn turned to Naomi. "You're the regional VP. Did none of this reach your level?" Naomi's face flushed. "There were rumors, occasional complaints that made it to my office, but never enough documentation to establish a pattern. The reports I did see were always classified as passenger misunderstandings or security protocols." "Or they never reached you at all," Evelyn said, her voice flat. The realization hit her like a physical blow. If this could happen to her, the CEO, what chance did ordinary passengers have? People without power, without connections, without the ability to make someone listen? "Cancel my Los Angeles trip," Evelyn said decisively. "The entire itinerary. I'm staying in Atlanta until I understand exactly what's happening here." "What about Flight 1422?" Naomi asked, gesturing toward the waiting aircraft. "The plane stays at the gate only long enough to reassign crew duties," Evelyn instructed. "If necessary, deplane passengers respectfully and offer full rebooking assistance. But that aircraft isn't going anywhere until we have a properly vetted crew in place." She turned to Naomi, her expression leaving no room for argument. "I need you to secure all complaint records from the Atlanta station immediately. Everything from the past 2 years. And do it before anyone has a chance to edit or delete anything." Naomi's eyes widened. "You think someone would—" "I think people who discriminate also cover their tracks," Evelyn cut in. "And I want those records intact." "The station operations office is upstairs," Marjorie offered. "That's where all the local files are kept." Evelyn nodded. "Then that's where we're going." "Right now." The three women moved with purpose through the terminal, past curious onlookers and busy travelers who had no idea of the investigation unfolding in their midst. Evelyn's mind raced with questions. How deep did this go? How many passengers had suffered in silence? How had this happened under her watch? They took an elevator marked Authorized Personnel Only, Naomi's badge granting them access to the administrative level above the main concourse. The contrast was immediate, from the colorful, bustling terminal to sterile hallways with fluorescent lighting and blank walls. The operations office door required another badge swipe. Inside, staff members looked up in surprise as Evelyn entered. Few recognized her immediately. She rarely visited individual stations, but the presence of their regional VP made it clear this wasn't a routine visit. "This is Evelyn Brooks," Naomi announced, her voice carrying unexpected authority. "CEO of Aurora Skies." The room fell silent. Evelyn wasted no time. "I need immediate access to all customer complaints filed at this station for the past 2 years," she said, walking toward the main supervisor's office. "Specifically, I want every complaint tied to Daniel Reeves and his gate team. Every single one." A young operations manager stepped forward. "Ma'am, those records are typically reviewed through proper channels and—" "I am the proper channel today," Evelyn said, her calm voice carrying more weight than any shout could. "Those files, now." The station office hummed with tense activity. 3 computer screens glowed with data as IT specialists mirrored local systems onto secure drives. A printer churned out page after page of archived complaint files. Though barely an hour had passed since the gate incident, Evelyn Brooks had transformed this ordinary administrative space into ground zero for an investigation. Evelyn sat at the conference table alongside Naomi and Marjorie, methodically sorting through the first batch of printed complaints. Her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose, and her expression grew darker with each document she reviewed. "Look at this," she said, sliding a paper toward Naomi. "January 14th. Elderly black couple removed from first-class boarding line. Told their tickets must be mistakes. Sound familiar?" Naomi's face tightened as she read. "Resolution status. Passenger misunderstanding. Filed by—" "Daniel Reeves," Evelyn finished. "And here's another from March. Woman in a wheelchair accused of using someone else's priority boarding pass." That was Mrs. "Watkins," Marjorie said quietly. "I remember her. She was a retired school principal flying to her grandson's graduation. She showed her ID 3 times, but they still made her wait until general boarding." Evelyn placed the paper on a growing pile. "Resolution again. Passenger misunderstanding. Closed within 4 hours of filing." The IT specialist approached with another stack. "Ma'am, we've retrieved complaints from the past 6 months. There are a lot of them." "How many?" Evelyn asked. 43, that match your search parameters," he replied. "All involving Atlanta gate staff, all with similar patterns." Evelyn nodded grimly. "Continue the search back to 2 years, as requested." As they worked through more files, a disturbing pattern emerged. Certain names appeared repeatedly in the approval chain for dismissing complaints. One name stood out. "Harold Pierce," Evelyn said, tapping her finger on a signature line. "Senior Operations Executive. He's signing off on these dismissals across multiple hubs, not just Atlanta." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her own stack of documents. "I've worked with Harold for years. He oversees service compliance for the entire Southeast region. If he's involved, then this isn't isolated to Atlanta." Evelyn completed her thought. Marjorie leaned forward. "It's not just what's in those reports," she said. "It's what happens every day that never gets reported. Black travelers asked for extra ID checks when white passengers aren't. Business class customers challenged about whether they really belong there. The way some gate agents speak to older black customers, like they're trespassers instead of paying passengers. She paused, her voice dropping. Most people just want to get to where they're going. They don't file complaints. They swallow their dignity and move on. Evelyn set down her pen and looked directly at both women. Not anymore. Not on my airline. She pulled out her phone and made a call to her executive assistant. Jacob, I need you to arrange an immediate internal audit. Complete discretion. Use external auditors who report directly to me. Focus on customer complaint resolution across all stations, particularly involving boarding procedures and priority access. After ending that call, she immediately dialed the head of corporate security. This is Brooks. I need you to preserve all access logs and surveillance footage from Gate B14 today. Every camera angle, every second. And I want it secured off-network before anyone else knows we're looking. Naomi looked alarmed. You think someone might try to delete evidence? I think when people hide discrimination, they usually hide other things too, Evelyn replied. The IT specialist approached again, this time with a tablet. Ms. Brooks, we've recovered today's security footage from the gate area. Would you like to review it now? Evelyn nodded, and they gathered around the screen. The footage showed Daniel Reeves at the gate, directing passengers. The timestamp matched Evelyn's arrival. They watched as Daniel smiled and waved through 3 white passengers in business attire without checking their boarding passes. Then Evelyn approached, and his body language shifted immediately. He straightened, put out his hand to stop her, and demanded her documents. Pause it there, Evelyn said quietly. The screen froze on Daniel's face, his expression a mix of suspicion and authority as he looked at Evelyn. This isn't about misunderstandings, she said, her voice controlled but vibrating with intensity. This is deliberate, and we now have it on video. Naomi stared at the screen, her professional composure finally cracking. I had no idea it was this blatant. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize, Evelyn replied. Help me fix it. She turned to the IT specialist. Download everything. We're just getting started. The afternoon sun slanted through the office blinds, casting striped shadows across the growing mountain of evidence. What had begun as a humiliating moment at an airport gate was revealing itself as something far more insidious. A system that protected itself at the expense of passengers' dignity. And Evelyn Brooks was now its worst nightmare. Evelyn settled into the airport hotel's conference room, a space with beige walls and practical furniture that felt both anonymous and tense. The Atlanta sunset painted orange streaks across the skyline, visible through the windows. Instead of being on her flight to Los Angeles as planned, she sat at the head of a long table, facing a large screen where Naomi had set up video calls with passengers whose complaints had been buried. I've confirmed 5 interviews in the next 2 hours, Naomi explained, setting up her laptop. These people responded immediately when we reached out. They're eager to be heard. Marjorie arranged water glasses and notepads around the table. Some of these incidents happened on my flights. I saw things, but couldn't. She stopped herself. I should have tried harder. We'll address that later, Evelyn said firmly. Right now, I need to hear their stories directly. The first call connected. On screen appeared Walter Jenkins, a distinguished black man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes that couldn't hide his lingering hurt. Mr. Jenkins, thank you for speaking with us, Evelyn began. I'm Evelyn Brooks, CEO of Aurora Skies. The man's eyebrows rose. The CEO herself? That's a first. I understand you had a troubling experience on one of our flights last year. Could you tell me what happened? Walter adjusted his glasses. My daughter gifted me first-class tickets so I could take my grandchildren to Disney World. Special trip. His voice wavered slightly. At the gate, your staff, a young man named Kevin, pulled me aside. said there was an irregularity with my ticket. Walter's hands tightened in his lap. He asked how I got first-class tickets, suggested they might be obtained improperly. My grandchildren, 10 and 8 years old, were right there, hearing every word, watching their grandfather being treated like a criminal. Evelyn felt sick. What happened then? He made us wait while he verified the tickets. 30 minutes, people staring. My grandson asked if we were in trouble. Finally, Kevin said it was cleared up, but never apologized. Just let us board after everyone else. Walter leaned closer to his camera. I filed a complaint. Got an email saying it was a misunderstanding and offering 5,000 miles. My daughter wanted to sue, but I was too embarrassed. His voice hardened. I haven't flown since. Evelyn took a deep breath. Mr. Jenkins, what happened to you was unacceptable and racist. Not a misunderstanding. I apologize personally, but I know that's not enough. The interviews continued. Rita Mercer, a retired nurse in her 60s, described being pulled from the priority line despite having lounge access through her credit card. The agent said, I didn't look like I belonged in the lounge, Rita explained, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Asked 3 times if I understood how boarding worked. Made me show my ID twice while people behind me watched. I've been a million-miler with your airline for years. With each story, the pattern became clearer. Patricia Wong described being questioned about her business-class ticket, while her white colleagues boarded without issue. James Thompson recalled a gate agent insisting his premium boarding status must be a system error. Between calls, Evelyn took careful notes, her handwriting growing tighter with each page. Marjorie occasionally added context. Flight numbers she recognized, staff members involved, patterns she'd noticed but couldn't prove. By the 5th interview, Evelyn's composed exterior had hardened into something more determined. This wasn't just about one incident, or even several. This was systemic. These people trusted us with more than their travel, she said during a brief break. They trusted us with their dignity, and we failed them. She looked at the notes spread across the table. Every one of these complaints was dismissed as a misunderstanding or resolved with token miles. Naomi pulled up a flowchart on her tablet. I've mapped how complaints are routed. Everything goes through regional supervisors first, then to Harold Pierce's team if escalated. Most never make it past the first review. Evelyn nodded grimly. And the supervisors report to Harold. She turned to her assistant. Set up immediate compensation packages for everyone we've spoken to today. Full refunds, premium status, and personal apologies. But that's just the beginning. The sky outside had darkened completely, runway lights now visible in the distance. Naomi's phone chimed with a message. She glanced at it, then looked up with surprise. It's about Harold Pierce, she said. He's flying into Atlanta tonight, landing in about an hour. How did he find out what we're doing? Marjorie asked. Someone must have alerted him, Evelyn replied, gathering her notes. Let me guess. He insists on meeting before we take any further action? Naomi nodded, reading the message. His exact words. Says it's critical we align on messaging before any premature steps are taken. Evelyn straightened her jacket, a calm determination settling over her features. Perfect. I'd much rather have this conversation in person. The evidence was spread across the table. Stories of humiliation, dismissed complaints, and broken trust, all illuminated by the harsh conference room lights as night fell completely outside. The executive meeting room of the airport hotel hummed with tension as Harold Pierce strode in shortly after 8 o'clock. His charcoal suit remained unwrinkled despite his flight from Charlotte, and his expression conveyed nothing but controlled concern. Evelyn stood as he entered, her posture matching his for authority, but lacking his practiced smoothness. Evelyn, he said, extending his hand. I came as soon as I heard. A regrettable situation. She shook his hand briefly. Harold, thank you for coming on short notice. Naomi and Marjorie sat quietly at the table, the evidence from their afternoon's work strategically arranged, but not hidden. Harold's eyes flicked over the stacks of printed complaints before he took his seat across from Evelyn. I've received preliminary reports, Harold began, his voice dropping into what Evelyn recognized as his crisis management tone. An unfortunate frontline error that happened to involve you personally. These things occur in operations our size. Evelyn watched him carefully. This wasn't just about me. Harold nodded sympathetically. Of course not. Any passenger deserves proper treatment. The optics are particularly concerning here. A black woman, our CEO no less, experiencing discrimination at our own gate. I've drafted a statement for tomorrow that frames the immediate dismissals as decisive leadership while reaffirming our values. He slid a tablet across the table with a prepared press release. Evelyn glanced at it without touching the device. Your statement mentions an isolated incident, she noted. Best practice in these situations, Harold replied. We address what happened, take visible action, and avoid language that suggests systemic misconduct. The firings send a clear message, without inviting broader scrutiny. Evelyn pushed forward a folder of complaint records. We've been reviewing similar reports all afternoon. Black passengers questioned about their tickets. Older travelers removed from priority lines. People challenged about lounge access based on appearance. Dozens of cases, Harold. Harold's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly on his pen. Every airline receives thousands of service complaints. Context matters here. What percentage are we talking about? How many were verified? Customer perceptions aren't always aligned with operational realities. Naomi watched his face as he spoke, noting how his concern seemed directed at containing the story rather than addressing the harm. We've personally spoken with multiple passengers, Evelyn countered. Their stories aren't perceptions, they're experiences, and nearly all their complaints were dismissed at the local level. Harold leaned back slightly. That's standard procedure. Local supervisors filter everyday service issues from serious incidents. It's efficiency, not concealment. Then why didn't these reach executive review? Evelyn pressed. A pattern this consistent should have triggered alerts. Harold's smile remained but thinned noticeably. Our protocols include statistical thresholds to separate signal from noise. Legal advised years ago that every allegation of bias can't receive senior treatment without overwhelming the system. Legal advised, Evelyn repeated. Who specifically? Outside counsel, Harold replied smoothly. Standard practice across the industry. Ask any airline. Marjorie, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. Mr. Pierce, I've been flying for 30 years. Crews were taught which passengers to flag as potential problems. Not officially, but it happened. Harold's calm demeanor cracked briefly. That's simply not accurate, Ms. Hale. We have documented service standards that apply to every passenger. On paper, yes, Marjorie continued, undeterred by the executive's dismissal. But supervisors like Daniel Reeves told crews which passengers deserved extra verification. Young black men traveling alone. Older people who might need assistance but hadn't requested it. Anyone who doesn't look the part of premium class. That's an inflammatory accusation without evidence, Harold snapped, his practiced patience slipping. If there were isolated misconceptions among staff, that's precisely why we have training. Training you oversee, Evelyn noted quietly. Harold straightened his already perfect tie. Evelyn, I understand you had a personally upsetting experience today, but elevating this into a company-wide crisis based on anecdotal reports would be reckless. The dismissals were appropriate. A measured statement is prudent. Anything more risks shareholder confidence and invites litigation. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. Harold presented statistics showing complaint rates in line with industry averages. Evelyn countered with evidence of systematic dismissal of certain types of complaints. The longer they talked, the more Harold's responses focused on protecting the airline's reputation rather than addressing passenger dignity. After Harold finally left, promising to review protocols but making no concrete commitments, Evelyn remained at the table with Naomi and Marjorie. The digital clock on the wall showed 10:42 p.m. "He's going to bury this," Naomi said quietly. Evelyn looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at Marjorie's tired but determined face. She pulled her laptop closer and opened a new document. "No, he's not," she said firmly. "This isn't something we can handle quietly anymore. I need corporate communications on the phone within the hour. We're going to address this company-wide before midnight." Evelyn sat at the head of the small conference table in her hotel suite, her laptop open in front of her. The room's lighting felt too harsh against her tired eyes, but her posture remained perfect. On the screen, a grid of faces looked back at her. Naomi from the adjoining room, the company's crisis management team, the head of legal, and 3 board members who had been pulled into an emergency session. "I want to be absolutely clear," Evelyn said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion pulling at her. "What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It represents a failure at multiple levels, and I take full responsibility for not catching it sooner." She shared her screen to display a spreadsheet summarizing the complaints they'd uncovered in just the past few hours. "Effective immediately, we're implementing the following changes," she continued, switching to a document outline. "First, all discrimination complaints will be reviewed by an independent third-party firm, not internal management. Second, mandatory retraining for all customer-facing staff, starting with our hub locations. Third, we're removing station-level discretion on how bias incidents are categorized and reported." The head of legal, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria, cleared her throat. "Ms. Brooks, I support addressing this issue, but this timeline could create significant exposure." "Our exposure already exists," Evelyn cut in. "The question isn't whether we'll face consequences, but whether we'll deserve them. I'm also establishing a direct passenger hotline that reports straight to headquarters, bypassing local management entirely." Naomi nodded on screen. "I've already contacted 3 independent review firms that specialize in aviation customer experience. They can begin assessment as early as tomorrow." The urgency in the virtual room was palpable. Keyboards clicked as the communications team drafted statements. The head of operations mapped out training logistics. By 11:45 p.m., they had the framework of a comprehensive response plan. The board chair, a distinguished woman with silver-streaked hair, spoke up. "Evelyn, I've known you for 15 years. Your handling of this situation today shows exactly why you lead this company. The board supports these measures. We need to get ahead of this before it becomes a media nightmare." For the first time since that morning, Evelyn felt a small wave of relief. The nightmare of being publicly humiliated at her own airline's gate had transformed into something purposeful. They were moving forward. "We've identified 62 passengers with similar complaints from the past year alone," Naomi reported. "Our outreach team will begin contacting them tomorrow, with personal apologies and appropriate compensation." Marjorie, who had been quietly observing from a chair against the wall, looked up. "Maybe the worst part of today will finally lead to something clean," she said softly. "I've seen so many problems get buried over the years. This feels different." Evelyn nodded to her. "It is different, because we're not just fixing a procedure. We're changing a culture." The final person to join the call was Harold Pierce. His expression remained oddly serene as he listened to the decisions that had already been made. When Evelyn asked for his input on implementation, He merely nodded. "I'll ensure operational compliance," he said smoothly. "Though I would caution that public crises punish companies that lose message discipline. We should be careful about admitting systemic issues before we've confirmed their scope." Something in his tone made Evelyn uneasy, but she pushed the feeling aside. "Our discipline will be in our transparency," she countered. "Thank you all for your quick response tonight. We'll reconvene at 7 tomorrow morning to begin implementation." As the meeting ended, Evelyn closed her laptop and finally allowed her shoulders to drop. She kicked off her shoes and walked to the window, looking out at the airport lights blinking in the distance. For the first time in 16 hours, she took a deep breath that didn't feel like it was fighting through a knot in her chest. The knock on her door came just as she was about to wash her face. She tightened the belt on her hotel robe and opened it to find Naomi standing there, her phone in hand, face ashen. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, immediately alert again. "It's the press," Naomi said, turning her phone screen toward Evelyn. "Breaking news. They have an internal memo. With your signature." Evelyn took the phone, her brow furrowing as she read the headline displayed on the screen. The relief she'd felt seconds ago evaporated completely. Naomi's hand trembled slightly as she passed her phone to Evelyn. The screen showed a breaking news alert from the Atlanta Business Chronicle. Exclusive, Aurora Skies, CEO knew about discrimination. Memo shows Brooks ordered complaints buried. Evelyn stared at the headline, uncomprehending at first. "What is this?" "It's everywhere," Naomi said, her voice tight. "CNN, MSNBC, even the airline blogs? They're all running with it." Evelyn scrolled down to see a screenshot of what appeared to be an internal company memo. The letterhead was correct. The formatting matched Aurora's official documents. And at the bottom, her name and digital signature. The memo laid out a protocol for handling passenger conflict situations with potential discrimination implications. It instructed managers to reclassify such complaints as general customer service incidents unless they received external media attention or legal escalation. The words blurred before her eyes as she read a passage highlighted in the article. "While we must maintain appropriate documentation for legal purposes, public-facing complaint statistics should reflect only verified service failures, not subjective passenger interpretations of staff motivations." "I never wrote this," Evelyn said, her voice hardening. "I never authorized this." Naomi nodded. "I know. But the digital signature chain looks authentic. It shows your approval from 3 months ago." The television on the wall suddenly flashed with a news alert. Evelyn grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. "Breaking tonight," the anchor announced. "The CEO of Aurora Skies Airlines, who made headlines earlier today for firing staff who denied her boarding, appears to have known about and personally approved policies to downplay discrimination complaints. Critics are calling it a case of rules for thee, but not for me." Evelyn's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The board chair. "Naomi, get me everything you can on that memo. When it was created, who accessed it? Everything." As Evelyn answered the call, Naomi stepped into the hallway to give her privacy, only to return seconds later with Marjorie, who looked stunned. "Ms. Brooks," the board chair's voice was clipped. "I need an explanation. We just backed your reform announcement, and now this surfaces? The timing is catastrophic." "The memo is fake," Evelyn replied firmly. "I never wrote or approved it. The digital authentication shows otherwise. It was processed through our secure document system with your credentials. Then, someone used my credentials without authorization." There was a heavy pause. "That's a serious accusation. Who would have both the access and motivation?" "I intend to find out," Evelyn said. "I need your trust for 24 hours. Trust is in short supply right now, Evelyn. Our stock is already down 3% in after-hours trading. Social media is calling for boycotts." Evelyn looked up to see Marjorie standing awkwardly by the door, her expression clouded with doubt. "Do you believe this?" Evelyn asked her directly. Marjorie hesitated. "I want to believe you, but that memo explains a lot about what's been happening. How complaints disappeared. Why nothing ever changed." The betrayal in that moment cut deeper than the public humiliation at the gate. Evelyn ended her call with a promise to provide evidence of the forgery by morning. Her phone rang again immediately. Harold Pierce. "Evelyn, I've just seen the news," he said, his voice a perfect blend of concern and professionalism. "This is deeply unfortunate timing." "Did you know about this memo before tonight?" she asked bluntly. "Of course not," he replied, sounding mildly offended. "I'm calling to offer support. The board is understandably concerned about stability. It might be prudent for you to step back temporarily while we investigate. I can manage operations in the interim." The calculation behind his words was suddenly crystal clear. "That won't be necessary, Harold," she said evenly. "I'll handle this personally." After ending the call, Evelyn turned to Naomi. "I need the IT security team on this immediately. Full audit of document access and authentication logs." Naomi nodded grimly. "And if we find tampering?" "When we find tampering," Evelyn corrected her. "Whoever did this was clever enough to forge my signature, but careless enough to contradict everything in my leadership history." After Naomi and a still uncertain Marjorie left, Evelyn sat alone in the silent hotel room. She opened her laptop and pulled up the memo again, studying it with cold fury. The language was formal, but distinctly not hers. The policy outlined was exactly what she would never approve. She knew with absolute certainty that someone inside her own leadership team had orchestrated this. Someone with enough access to forge her signature and enough desperation to sacrifice her reputation to save themselves. The clock on the nightstand read 1:07 a.m. Less than 18 hours ago, she'd been a respected CEO heading to a routine meeting. Now she was fighting for her career, her company, and the truth itself. At 1:15 a.m., Evelyn Brooks stood by the hotel room window, her reflection ghostly against the tarmac lights below. Sleep wasn't an option. She had changed from her travel suit into a black cashmere sweater and slacks. Comfortable, but still commanding. The remains of room service coffee grew cold beside her laptop. "We need everything," she said, as Naomi arranged the hotel desk into a makeshift command center. "Not just the memo, but the bones underneath it." On the video screen, Aurora Airlines' head of cybersecurity, Marcus Jennings, nodded grimly. His office in Chicago was fully lit, despite the hour. Team members visible behind him. "Ms. Brooks, we're mirroring the document management system now," Marcus said. "Metadata doesn't lie even when people do." Evelyn's approach was methodical, not emotional. Rage wouldn't recover what was stolen from her. Only evidence would. "I want approval chain logs for every version of this document. Creation timestamps, access records, server authentication points. If this memo breathed on our network, I want to know when and how." Naomi worked her phone furiously, typing between calls. "The board chair is asking for a statement by 6 a.m. Tell them I'm conducting a security investigation into document forgery before making any public statements. Ask for 4 hours to present evidence of tampering." "They're talking about a temporary suspension, Evelyn," Naomi warned. "Then they better be prepared to reverse it publicly when I prove this is fabricated." Evelyn's voice was steel, not fire. 4 hours. That's all I need." A quiet knock interrupted. Marjorie Hale stood in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion and remorse. "I shouldn't have doubted you," she said simply. "After all these years watching passengers get treated unfairly, I should have known better than to think you were behind it." Evelyn gestured her in. "We don't have time for apologies. I need information." Marjorie stepped inside, twisting her hands together. Something's been bothering me since we started digging. About 6 months ago, I overheard Daniel, the supervisor you fired today, telling another gate agent that head office had specific instructions for coding passenger complaints. Certain words needed to be avoided in reports. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Which words? Discrimination, profiling, race. Marjorie looked down. He said using those terms triggered unnecessary escalation and to use service failure instead. Did he mention who at head office? Naomi asked. No names, just that it came from upstairs and would protect everyone's performance reviews. Evelyn turned back to the screen. Marcus, search for procedural memos about complaint classification over the last year. And check who had template access to my signature block. By 2:30 a.m., the hotel room was littered with coffee cups and takeout containers. Marcus's team had created a document timeline on a shared screen, highlighting anomalies in yellow. Here's what we know, he said, circling a section. The leaked memo shows a creation date from 8 months ago, but its digital signature uses an encryption key that wasn't implemented until 4 months ago. So it was backdated, Evelyn concluded. Precisely. And the document was created using a privileged template account that belongs to Executive Administrative Services. Naomi leaned forward. Harold Pierce's executive assistant has access to that. More than access, Marcus continued. The revision history shows document fragments created on her workstation, but final assembly happened offline before being uploaded to the system as a completed file. Can you prove it wasn't me? Evelyn asked directly. Your authentication records show you were in a board meeting during the final document upload. Unless you can be in 2 digital places at once, you couldn't have authorized it. By 3 a.m., the evidence was mounting. The forged memo wasn't a panicked response to today's gate incident. It was part of a calculated structure of concealment, activated now as a weapon against Evelyn. This isn't just about covering mistakes, Evelyn said quietly. It's systematic. Marjorie nodded. They've been burying these complaints for years. I just never knew how high it went. Marcus's voice cut through their conversation. Ms. Brooks, we found something else. When we searched complaint classification protocols, we discovered a related compliance training recording in the archive. It was flagged for deletion, but hadn't been purged yet. His fingers moved across his keyboard. Playing it now. Harold Pierce's unmistakable voice filled the room. Listen, I understand your concerns, but these racial complaint designations are killing our metrics. The board sees these numbers. Investors see these numbers. We need these reclassified as general customer satisfaction issues. Nothing specifically about discrimination should appear in quarterly reports. A different voice responded, but if passengers are specifically reporting racial profiling, then they're misinterpreting normal security procedures. Harold cut in sharply. Your job is to protect this airline's reputation, not validate every passenger's perception. Downgrade the complaints, revise the reporting language, and focus on the performance indicators that actually matter to our bottom line. The recording ended with Harold's final instruction. This conversation never happened. Silence filled the hotel room for several seconds before Evelyn spoke, her voice dangerously quiet. It seems Mr. Pierce forgot that compliance recordings are automatically archived. Naomi stared at the screen. This was from 11 months ago, and it destroys his plausible deniability. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Make a secure copy of that recording. Then wake up our general counsel. The digital evidence had shifted the battlefield. What began as Evelyn's defensive struggle had transformed into something else entirely. An offensive against corruption that had festered within her own company. Pre-dawn light crept through the windows of the private conference suite near the terminal. The sky over Atlanta had barely begun its transformation from black to gray, as Evelyn sat at the head of a polished table, her eyes fixed on the screen before her. Naomi stood by the door, fielding urgent calls while keeping others at bay. Marjorie, who had refused to leave despite the hour, sat quietly, with her hands folded. "Play it again," Evelyn said. "I want to hear every word." The audio recording filled the room once more. Harold's voice, confident and cold. "Listen, I need you all to understand something fundamental about our operations. Complaint volume directly impacts our quarterly performance metrics. Those metrics determine your bonuses, your station evaluations, and ultimately, our investor confidence." A pause, then Harold continued, "Any complaint with racial undertones must be neutralized before it reaches corporate review. Reclassify them as customer misunderstanding or procedural confusion. If passengers insist, offer them vouchers, but never, ever admit to discriminatory practices." Someone on the recording asked, "What if they have evidence? Videos or witnesses?" "Then you make it worth their while to drop it," Harold answered without hesitation. "A first-class upgrade, bonus miles, whatever it takes. Just keep it contained at the station level. Remember, your performance reviews depend on minimizing escalated complaints." Evelyn stopped the playback and looked at Marjorie. "How long have you noticed this happening?" "Years," Marjorie said, her voice heavy with regret. "But it was always handled so quickly. Black passengers would complain, then suddenly they'd be pulled aside, given something free, and the complaint would disappear. I thought they were being taken care of. I didn't realize they were being silenced. The entire system was designed to reward concealment," Evelyn said, her fingers tapping against the table. "Gate agents like Daniel were just the visible part. Behind them stood supervisors, station managers, and executives who all benefited from keeping complaints buried." Naomi approached the table. "The board chair is waiting on the secure line. They're concerned about the developing situation." "I imagine they are," Evelyn said, reaching for her phone. "Tell them I'm sending evidence directly to our outside counsel, to each board member personally, and to the Department of Transportation. Harold won't have time to spin this." While Evelyn briefed the board chair, Naomi turned to her tablet, drafting language for a potential statement. When Evelyn finished her call, Naomi slid the tablet across the table. "We should issue this from headquarters as soon as possible. Clean, controlled, forward-looking. We acknowledge issues were discovered, action is being taken, and changes are forthcoming." Evelyn read it, then pushed the tablet back without a word. "That's not enough," she said. "Not nearly enough." "What do you want to do?" Naomi asked. Evelyn stood and walked to the window. The airport was coming alive as the first flights of the day prepared for departure. "This began at a gate, in public, where I was humiliated because of how I look. That's where the truth needs to be told." She turned back to face them. "Schedule a press conference for 11 this morning, here at the airport, gate B14. "The same gate?" Marjorie asked. "Exactly the same gate," Evelyn confirmed. "And make sure Harold Pierce is there." Naomi looked alarmed. "Evelyn, we can control the narrative better from headquarters. The airport will be chaotic, unpredictable." "That's precisely the point," Evelyn said. "This isn't about corporate control anymore. It's about facing the truth where it happened. No boardroom shields, no prepared backdrops. Just the reality of where passengers stand every day." The next hours blurred into motion. Security was arranged, media was notified. The gate area would be temporarily closed to regular traffic. Legal prepared briefing materials while communications drafted talking points. Through it all, Evelyn remained focused, reviewing evidence and preparing herself for what was to come. As the sun fully rose over Atlanta, bringing full daylight to the terminal, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message from Harold. "Think carefully about what you're doing. A public war will destroy this airline. Stocks will plummet. Jobs will be lost. Your legacy will be the CEO who brought down her own company out of personal grievance. There are still ways to handle this privately. Evelyn read the message twice, then typed her reply. Harold, you're mistaken about something fundamental. It wasn't my public humiliation that endangered this airline. It was the years of secrecy, the buried complaints, the systematic erosion of dignity that nearly destroyed us. The truth isn't what breaks us. The lies already did that. See you at the gate. She set her phone down and looked at Naomi and Marjorie. It's time to get ready. Late morning sunlight streamed through the massive windows at gate B14, where less than 24 hours earlier, Evelyn Brooks had stood humiliated. Now, the space had transformed. Portable podiums faced the boarding lane, news cameras lined the perimeter, and a mix of reporters, curious travelers, airport staff, and stone-faced board representatives crowded the area. Evelyn approached the center podium, dressed in a charcoal suit that radiated quiet authority. She carried no notes. Her face showed neither anger nor fear, just calm determination. Marjorie stood off to the side, her presence a silent witness to yesterday's events. Naomi positioned herself near the technical equipment, tablet in hand, ready to present evidence. Harold Pierce arrived 5 minutes before the scheduled start, striding confidently through the terminal. His expensive suit and practiced smile suggested a man who still believed in his ability to manage any crisis. He nodded to several board members, shaking hands with practiced ease. "Quite the spectacle," he murmured to the board chair. "We could have handled this with a simple press release." The board chair gave him a measured look, but said nothing. At precisely 11 o'clock, Evelyn stepped to the microphone. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Travelers passing through the terminal slowed, some stopping completely when they realized something significant was happening. "Good morning," Evelyn began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Evelyn Brooks. I am the CEO of Aurora Skies Airlines. Yesterday, at this exact spot, I was denied boarding onto my own airline's flight." She gestured to the boarding lane behind her. "I was told I didn't belong in the priority line despite holding a first-class ticket. I was spoken to with contempt, accused of confusion, and threatened with removal, all while other passengers received courteous treatment." Evelyn didn't raise her voice, but her words carried throughout the gate area. "What happened to me was wrong. But what makes it unforgivable is that it wasn't an isolated incident. After firing the gate crew responsible, I discovered hundreds of similar complaints from other passengers, predominantly black travelers, elderly customers, and people who simply didn't look right to certain staff members." She paused, letting her words sink in. These complaints were systematically buried. They were downgraded, reclassified, and hidden from executive review. This was not accidental. It was policy. Harold shifted his weight, his smile fading as he glanced toward the exit. "Last night, someone attempted to sabotage our investigation by releasing a forged memo that appeared to show I knew about these practices and approved them." Evelyn's gaze swept across the crowd. "That document was created using executive access codes, backdated and leaked to the press in a desperate attempt to protect those truly responsible." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. "Ms. Brooks," Harold called out, stepping forward with practiced concern. "This is hardly the appropriate forum for unverified allegations that could damage." The board chair raised a hand. "Mr. Pierce, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Please allow Ms. Brooks to finish." Harold's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Evelyn nodded to Naomi, who tapped her tablet. "The evidence speaks for itself," Evelyn continued. "Our cybersecurity team has traced the document forgery. And, more importantly, we've uncovered recordings that reveal exactly how this system of discrimination was maintained." Naomi pressed another button, and Harold's voice suddenly filled the terminal, crisp and unmistakable through the speakers. Look, complaint numbers affect everything: station bonuses, performance metrics, investor confidence. These discrimination claims are toxic. They need to be neutralized before they reach compliance review. Recode them as customer misunderstanding or service recovery and keep them at station level. If passengers push back, offer minimal compensation with NDAs. This needs to be managed quietly. The board doesn't need to see these patterns. The recording continued, with Harold clearly instructing managers on hiding evidence and silencing complainants. Throughout the terminal, travelers stopped walking completely. Phones raised to record. The board members' expressions hardened as they turned toward Harold, whose face had drained of color. His composed exterior cracked as his own voice condemned him. When the recording finished, the silence was deafening. Harold looked around, seeing no allies, no escape route. The scheme he had believed impenetrable was now echoing through the very public space where it had operated. The invisible system of discrimination and cover-up that had thrived in darkness was now fully exposed in the harsh light of day. "That's impossible," he finally stammered. "That recording is authenticated by 3 independent experts," Evelyn finished for him. "Along with your electronic signature on directives to regional managers establishing the complaint suppression system." Harold's face emptied of expression as he realized the completeness of his exposure. His careful empire of concealment was collapsing around him in the most public way possible. At an airport gate, surrounded by the very passengers whose dignity he had sacrificed for metrics and bonuses. The recording had just finished playing, and gate B14 fell into a stunned silence. For 5 heartbeats, no one moved. No one spoke. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and raw. Then the reaction hit all at once. Passengers gasped and whispered. Reporters scrambled to capture every moment. Airport staff exchanged shocked glances. Harold Pierce stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in full public view. The board chair, a distinguished woman in her 60s, stepped forward deliberately. Her voice carried through the terminal with measured authority. "In light of this evidence, the board has unanimously voted for the immediate termination of Harold Pierce from all positions within Aurora Skies Airlines." Her gaze fell heavily on Harold. "This termination is effective immediately, pending criminal and regulatory investigations into fraud, discrimination, and corporate malfeasance." Harold's face contorted. "You can't possibly." "We already have," the board chair cut him off. "Corporate counsel has verified the forged memo bearing Ms. Brooks's signature, the systematic manipulation of our complaint systems, and the deliberate obstruction of executive oversight. The board's decision is final." 2 airport police officers appeared beside Harold, followed by men and women in dark suits who identified themselves as federal investigators. One officer stepped forward. "Mr. Pierce, we need you to come with us, sir." Cameras recorded everything. Phones captured every moment from dozens of angles. The public consequence playing out matched Evelyn's public humiliation in visibility. But where her experience had been chaotic and unjust, this response was measured, precise, and deserved. Harold's shoulders slumped as the officers guided him away. The man who had dismissed thousands of complaints, who had built a system to silence the humiliated, now walked the same terminal floor where it all began, stripped of his power and heading toward accountability. Evelyn watched him go, her face showing not triumph but resolution. Then she turned back to the microphones. "What happened yesterday wasn't an isolated incident," she said. "And what we've uncovered isn't just about one executive. It's about systems that allowed abuse to hide in plain sight." She unfolded a single sheet of paper. "Effective immediately, Aurora Skies is implementing the following measures. First, we will establish a $50 million restitution fund for passengers who experience discrimination on our flights. We will proactively reach out to every person whose complaint was improperly coded or dismissed. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Second, all discrimination claims will now trigger automatic independent review outside our management chain. Third, we will publish quarterly accountability reports tracking these incidents and our responses. Complete transparency, no exceptions. Evelyn paused, then continued with increasing passion. Fourth, we are creating a new passenger advocacy department staffed by people who understand that dignity isn't a premium service. It's a human right. And finally, we're promoting employees who had the courage to intervene ethically, beginning with Marjorie Hale, who will head our new passenger advocacy team. Marjorie, standing nearby, blinked back tears as applause broke out. Naomi Bell will oversee hub-by-hub implementation of these changes, Evelyn added, nodding toward Naomi. She'll have my direct authority and an independent budget to ensure these aren't just promises, but actions. The crowd that had watched Evelyn be disrespected now witnessed the powerful architect of that disrespect removed from authority. The vindication unfolded not in private boardrooms, but in the same public space where injustice had thrived. One reporter called out, "Ms. Brooks, will you resign over this scandal?" Evelyn shook her head firmly. "I built this airline to bring dignity to air travel. I failed to see the rot beneath our wings, and for that, I take full responsibility. But I will not abandon my duty to fix what broke under my watch." Leadership isn't just about success. It's about accountability when things go wrong. As Harold disappeared from view, escorted toward waiting authorities, Evelyn turned from punishment to repair. She stepped away from the podium and moved closer to the gathered passengers. Her posture shifted subtly. Less the CEO protecting a brand, more a steward restoring broken trust. To our passengers, especially those who were mistreated, I make this promise. What happened here will change not just policies, but culture. Because an airline isn't planes or routes or profit margins. It's the promise that when you step into our care, you will be treated with dignity, regardless of who you are. The words settled across Gate B14, where just yesterday Evelyn had stood alone against institutional disrespect. Now she stood at the center of institutional renewal. The very public humiliation transformed into equally public justice. Early afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Concourse B, casting long rectangles across the polished floor. The press conference had ended just 30 minutes earlier, but the airport had already returned to its rhythmic flow of departures and arrivals. At Gate B22, a delayed Aurora Skies flight to Chicago was preparing to board after the morning's disruption had rippled through the schedule. Evelyn Brooks stood near the edge of the waiting area, watching the gate agents prepare. She had options: the corporate offices upstairs, the executive lounge, or even a private car back to headquarters. But something pulled her toward this ordinary flight instead. "Are you sure about this?" Naomi asked, checking her watch. "We have the emergency board call in 2 hours." "I'll make it back in time," Evelyn said. "But I need to see this." The new gate team, hastily assembled after the morning's terminations, moved with careful precision. No passenger was waved through without proper verification, yet no one was subjected to unnecessary scrutiny. The lead agent, a woman with silver-streaked hair and calm eyes, made eye contact with each traveler. Evelyn approached the boarding area just as pre-boarding was announced. Conversations quieted as passengers recognized her from the news coverage that had been playing on every airport screen all morning. She stepped forward, not to cut the line, but to address the waiting travelers. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying without a microphone. "I'm Evelyn Brooks, and I want to personally assure you that what you may have witnessed or heard about today marks a turning point for Aurora Skies." Passengers lowered phones and removed earbuds, giving her their full attention. From this moment forward, dignity will never depend on appearance, race, age, or status on our airline. That's not a slogan. It's a promise I'm here to keep. Her words were simple, but carried the weight of the morning's revelations. A man in a business suit nodded. An elderly woman clutched her boarding pass a little less anxiously. "Thank you for your patience today," Evelyn concluded. "And thank you for the opportunity to earn back your trust." Near the jet bridge entrance, Marjorie Hale stood in her familiar flight attendant uniform, but with a new pin identifying her as Interim Director of In-Flight Culture and Training. The promotion had been announced just an hour ago, yet she already carried herself with visible steadiness. This was the woman who had recognized something wrong and tried to intervene, now empowered to ensure others would do the same. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marjorie greeted the first passengers. "Welcome aboard." Naomi positioned herself behind the gate counter, overseeing the new team with careful attention. These agents had been specifically briefed. Verify facts before asserting authority. Treat confusion as an opportunity for assistance rather than confrontation, and recognize that respect costs nothing but means everything. When priority boarding was called, Evelyn remained where she was, waiting her turn with the other passengers. A few people glanced at her questioningly, perhaps expecting the CEO to bypass the line. "Zone 2, Ms. Brooks?" a young man asked, noticing her standard boarding pass. "Just like everyone else," she confirmed with a small smile. When her zone was called, Evelyn joined the line. The gate agent, a young black woman who must have felt the weight of the morning's events, took Evelyn's boarding pass and scanned it with professional efficiency. "Seat 12A, window seat," she said, meeting Evelyn's eyes. "Have a good flight, Ms. Brooks." No excessive deference, no spectacle. Just simple courtesy. Exactly what had been denied to her 24 hours earlier. "Thank you," Evelyn replied. As she moved forward, she felt the symbolism of crossing this threshold that had once become a barrier. She passed through the scanner without incident, walked down the jet bridge, and stepped onto the aircraft. Marjorie greeted her at the door with the same warm professionalism she offered every other passenger. "Welcome aboard, Miss Brooks." Evelyn nodded her thanks and made her way down the aisle to her seat. No fanfare announced her presence. No special accommodations disrupted the normal boarding process. This invisibility was precisely the point. The freedom to travel without attention, without challenge, without having to prove you belong. She settled into 12A, placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, and fastened her seatbelt. A family with 2 small children took the seats across the aisle. An older gentleman nodded politely as he claimed the aisle seat in her row. Through the cabin windows, Evelyn could see other Aurora Skies aircraft lining up for departure. Each plane carried hundreds of passengers who would never know how close the airline had come to institutional failure, or how hard-won this ordinary moment of respect actually was. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and explaining their route to Chicago. Marjorie moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Evelyn felt the familiar rumble beneath her feet. The plane taxied toward the runway, joining the queue of aircraft waiting for takeoff clearance. Minutes later, the engines roared, and the plane accelerated down the runway. Evelyn watched through her window as the ground fell away, Atlanta becoming a pattern of buildings and roads, growing smaller by the second. In that moment of ascent, she knew with certainty that the company had changed course because she had refused to be pushed aside. Her airline was no longer merely hers by title, but reclaimed by principle, rising not just on thrust and lift, but on the fundamental understanding that dignity wasn't a luxury service, but the foundation of everything that mattered. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.